Who is Radikal Queen?
Radikal Queen is a vintage diva, revolutionary minded, speaks up for marginalized groups, including the children. Radikal Queen is here to represent the voice of her African indigenous ancestors going back, I don't even know how many centuries. Radikal Queen is an artist, a poet first, who has learned to do everything as a poet. And Radikal Queen is currently located in the northeast of England, but sees themselves as a global citizen. Radikal Queen is here, man.
What is JazzWitch?
JazzWitch is a live musical cabaret based in blues and jazz, telling the story of the disenfranchised BlacQueer MaGes who originated jazz as an art form and incorporating the story of the journey of the capture of their ancestors and how their genius developed something so unique. Its reach is global. However, it's an art form that has been colonized. And this story of colonization of art mirrors the journey of the colonization and capture of the people who created the art form. So JazzWitch attempts to tell different stories, stories that mirror each other, and stories that are relevant to the people who live them today, and stories that are definitely not reflected in the mainstream. JazzWitch endeavors to tell these stories using a new form of theater that takes the ancient griot storytelling forms of my culture, of my ancestors, and combines it with the immersive and digital technology that we have access to today to create landscapes, to enable journeys, to bring the audience along as co-conspirators. They're part of the gag. They are part of the journey. They are part of the mission. And JazzWitch hopes in this way to make the story as real as possible for everyone who participates in it.
Was there a moment or story that ignited JazzWitch?
A dream I had, and when I woke up, I did some research, and that's when I first heard about Crossroads Man, and I had this obsession with the blues. And as part of that journey, I found this incredible elder jazz musician in Minneapolis. He taught me how to play the guitar in a very short space of time. And then when I was back in England, I was introduced to this musician, this guitarist called OJ, who's incredible, who's absolute genius at his craft. And a series of events led me to create these 3 tracks specifically that were based on my experience of the blues, that were based on my experience as an African person, that were based on my experience of what I'd learned about those who were descended from the Africans who were trafficked from the continent during the slave trade. On International Women's Day, I proposed writing a story called JazzWitch about the queer Black femmes who originated blues and jazz music, African American queer folk, the ones who originated this art form. And the fact that we're now in a day and age where it's obviously a colonized art form. So I was fascinated by how far it had gone from its origins. And I wanted to talk about that. And I wanted to link that in with the stories of capture, with the stories of creativity, with the stories of perseverance of Black mages throughout the ages, throughout the centuries. But what was fascinating for me, looking back, is that I had this vision to create a show that wasn't just a cabaret, a live musical performance mixed in with spoken word and song, which is what I do. I wanted to incorporate these digital elements into it. I wanted to create platforms that would live before and after the performance, that would engage people, that would engage children, that would engage people who want to learn about African and Black history. And I also wanted to create a set which would transport people into this other world. You know, we're going to go back in time, we're going to go forward in time. And this is something that my ancestors have done. I come from a long line of what the West calls griots. And they've used these spiritual, esoteric, psychological crafts to transport audiences to different dimensions. And I wanted to do that using the technology that's available to us today via immersive arts and digital arts. Now, as soon as I started that journey, I realized how much I need to learn and how long it might take me, how long it would take me to really fully realize the vision. But I was able to start small. I was able to work with lights and music and performativity to bring audiences to the places I wanted to bring them to.
What do you want people to feel in this show and carry with them afterward?
I want people to feel what it is or what it was to have been persecuted simply for being who you are. I also want people to feel that you can belong and you are valid despite the fact that a regime or a government might have decided to legislate against your identity, against your existence. And this seems to be an issue that becomes more and more relevant with time, which tells us a lot about the evolution of modern Western society. Often JazzWitch is the program is malleable to reflect the issues of today. For example, the first performance, we had to move to a secret venue because an army of transphobes and TERFs on Twitter had vowed to attack the venue. And now we've heard about regime changes in a number of Western countries which affect a number of marginalized groups. And so it seems to me that JazzWitch, although we're talking about the past, it becomes more and more present and relevant as time goes past. So I'd like that to be a reminder to people about the reality of the world we live in. I also, as I've learned more and more about immersive and digital arts, I would like to be a part of creating a historical archive. And in this case, that is monitored and curated by African American historians and musicologists and hoodoo practitioners in order to preserve the legacy of this cultural phenomenon that was born from the genius of trafficked and persecuted African people in another country, in another land.
How does technology or digital media play a role in deepening the immersive experience?
Now, it's interesting you say this because I'm recently the recipient of an award from the organization's called Immersive Arts, just done the first round of a number of grants, which will allow different practitioners at different levels of expertise to explore and really kind of kickstart what they're trying to do. In my case, I won an Explore grant, and this is allowing me to learn what technologies I can use in a practical sense. When I started this journey, it was very much like, well, I want to do A, B, C, and D. And I had no idea what was involved in learning these different things. So I want to learn how to use lighting, music, smell if possible. I've already learned, it's been only a few days since I've been able to explore these things, but I want to learn as much as I can about what is available. And another thing that happened when I first started doing this, initially, because this all kicked off, I'd say, around COVID era. And at first, I think like a lot of artists, we thought, well, you know what? One way to continue to have live performances would be to record and do something digital. And like I said, I think a lot of us found, at least I'll speak for myself, the huge challenge was that an essential part of my performances is the human being, it's the audience, it's the people who you reflect off and who reflect off you. It's a very symbiotic relationship. So going back to what I said about the co-conspirators, that's such a vital element of this genre of theater that I want to bring to life.
What's brewing behind the scenes in your journey now?
A large part of my destiny lies in Belfast. Belfast is an incredible city, especially Queen's University, and there's so much going on there with regards to immersive digital technology. And what's exciting to me is the emphasis on how that also works with the creative arts, with creative performers. And I think that's exciting about what's happening in the UK as a whole, because if you look at what's happening with immersive art, well, digital arts and this immersive technology in other countries, I believe that the UK is leading the way in integrating it within the performing arts and really showing artists and practitioners ways in which we can enrich our practice. Often people feel that technology, digital technology, creates distance, creates space between the artist and the people in the audience. And that's not the case at all. And I'm really excited about demonstrating that within my art and with audiences in the future.
What kind of creative work have you been doing to push the project further? Rehearsals, writing, collaborating?
Speaking as an artist who deals with being neurodivergent in a world that's not really made for the neurodivergent, and I have been able to create a space, a lab, if you like, where I can work on the music and the writing that's integral to JazzWitch. But also a large part of, I think, this kind of work is networking, is finding like-minded practitioners and artists, of course, who represent the different skill sets that I would like to learn from and draw upon and work with in my shows. So I've reached out and I've spoken to incredible artists, musicians. I'm looking to find producers, I'm looking to find agents, I'm looking to find people who would be excited to be part of this process with me. So it's definitely a work in progress because my background is in grassroots theatre. So I'm used to making do. I'm used to sort of like looking, grabbing what's around me, people included, and seeing what we can do, seeing what we can create. And I'm still committed to grassroots theatre, but obviously integrating technology into it at this level presents its own unique challenges, especially if you want to remain authentic.
You've spoken about making theater accessible. What does that look like in your process and performances?
Okay, yes. Again, that involves consulting with experts in the field. I am in conversation and consultation with Adrienne Gravish. She's a creative consultant. She specializes in neurodivergent inclusive storytelling and accessibility. And she's also an ex-founding member of the first all-deaf staffed media consulting agency in the US. So obviously her insights are going to be vital for me if I want to layer accessibility into every stage of the process. We've already talked about how making it accessible for neurodivergent people, for deaf people, for people with different kinds of sensory issues. And as Adrienne says, if it's inclusive for the people who are at the margins of society, then it's going to de facto include the people who don't necessarily need any kind of accommodations to appreciate art and theatre. So I'm looking forward to that. I've been hearing stories about, for example, fabric that responds to sound and music. I'm looking at talking to an incredible artist, Cedric Uwaja, who's also based in the United States, and he creates the most incredible Afro-futuristic imagery and sculptures. So I'm looking at commissioning artwork, which again, the audience can interact with digitally. You touch certain parts and certain stories might come out or certain types of music might come out. So at this moment in time, there's really looking at all the possibilities available in terms of how to tell these kinds of stories and then narrowing it down and making decisions about what I'm going to do going forward.
Why is accessibility so important to you and so important to your practice?
Why is accessibility so important to me? I've always taken for granted since I was a child that life has to be just. And since a child, I've always felt compelled to quite literally fight for what I think is just and equitable and balanced. And that has continued with me throughout my life, and it informs everything I do, everybody who I interact with. And so you can't help but notice that there are some people who, because of the system that has been built around and upon us, that there are some people who are subjected to, I'd say, more difficulties, more unasked for, more unearned difficulties than other people. And if I can make a difference in that area, then I feel compelled to do that. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is that I would feel deprived. I would feel deprived of joy and mystery and the richness of life if I could only consume a very narrow band of the nominated humans who are given the most access to our screens, to our stages, to the resources that we all rely on. To me, that'd be a very boring world. And so I have always found the most interest in the margins. So I do have an ethos, bringing the margins to the center. And that is like, even if I'm watching, say, a performance and there's a famous A-list artist depicting an art form, which I already know has come from a marginalized group's creative genius, I find that the originators of that art form are the ones who aren't dancing center, front and center. They're the ones who are performing on the fringes, on the sides. And so I've always been interested in the richness that is often distributed away from the center. And I like the idea of bringing the margins to the center, but I also like the idea of bringing our attention to the margins.
JazzWitch honors the often overlooked Black queer femme founders of jazz. How do you carry their stories and spirits into your work?
So, as a poet and as somebody who's descended from a lineage, I'd say mystical storytellers, then accessing inner worlds comes very naturally to me. And trusting in the messages I get from the inner worlds also comes very naturally to me. So, I am guided by the love I feel, the love I've been given, to say the right thing, to make the right move, or the right for the time move, and the appropriate for the time thing. And it turns out that a lot of times there are going to be people who object to that. There are going to be people who find fault with that. And it's not my job to live within the margins prescribed by polite society. I have a piece which talks about the fact that at a certain time, chattel slavery was legal. So if we restrict all forms of protest to what is legal, or rather, if we accept that what is legal is correct, where would we be? Where would we be if there hadn't been uprisings in Haiti, for example, that specifically chose to overthrow Napoleon's rule? And that's one example, but there's so many examples all over the world of people being hammered with the oppression and the military brute force of larger governmental entities. And of course, they have the right to fight back. Of course, they have the right to break the law if the law is in contradiction to human dignity, to the gift of the life that we've all been given. Those are my feelings. And I'm not necessarily certain if I should be saying this out loud, but it's the truth. It's how I live.
What conversations or transformations do you hope JazzWitch sparks, especially among Black, queer, and femme audiences?
I would hope that it would be part of people interrogating the meaning of their voices, or perhaps examining the basis of what they see as true, what they see as reality, and what they see as right. And at that point, I think it'd be very, for me, the honor is in people allowing my voice to be a part of their life and their experience. Beyond that, don't have, I wouldn't want to even consider suggesting how people should use that and receive that. But I hope that from my end, I am able to communicate as much truth and honesty as I can, as much creativity and art and humor and love and sheer outrageousness as is appropriate for me as an artist, as Radikal Queen. I refer to Radikal Queen, my stage persona, as a vintage diva. And I sometimes say to young people that in times before, Radikal Queen would be the kind of person who would either be arrested or sectioned. And so, in that sense, this culture we're in has moved on. Black femmes, Black queer femmes, women in general, all kinds of marginalized voices are able to speak up more without fear of incarceration. Although, as I say that, I realize that there are many places in which this has gone backwards. You know, there are many places in which people maybe have to stay present, stay focused. So maybe a convoluted answer to that question is that I would like for people to become as much more in touch with their sense of freedom, with their right to be free, with their right to be themselves. And that also includes being aware of your surroundings. What is it in your world? What is it in your life that threatens your freedom? What is it in your reality that would like to wrest your freedom, that would like to take your voice from you? Be aware of where that's coming from, even if it's coming from within. And I'd say, pull it out, pull it out, like you would a plant that doesn't belong in the flower bed, and use it as mulch for something else that you want to grow.
What's next for Radical Queen, and how can folks support your journey?
What is next for Radical Queen? My goodness, I do feel that the road in front of me is so wide and so open. I would like to develop JazzWitch. So it's an interactive, immersive experience that I can take on the road and I can introduce to different communities. I would like to create a digital, virtual museum where we can include historical archives through images, through stories of the dispossessed, the displaced Africans in this planet. And the reason I would like it to be digital and virtual is that it means that we retain control. Nobody can decide what goes in it. Nobody can decide what doesn't go in it but us, but our communities. And that's something which could have a global reach. It could go anywhere that we would like it to go and that would like us to be there. I'd like to expand JazzWitch and the messages within JazzWitch. I want to make my ancestors proud. I want to do right by my culture and by my heritage. And this is a for me, this is a huge step in that direction. I also feel that there are stories beyond JazzWitch that I want to work on as well. And there's so many stories within Africa, the African diaspora, and all of her children